Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast that tells the story behind the book. It includes insights from authors about how they compose their work, what inspires them, and what they hope you'll take away from their book. Here's your host for this episode of Books on Air, Suzanne Harris.
Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Sloan Fremont, filling in for Suzanne Harris. This is the podcast where listeners get the secret story behind every book. Joining me today is Margaret Townley, author of the book, The Dogs Are Curling Up Again. This book traces the journey of a Chilean refugee, Isabel, who returns to her country after 14 years as an exile in the UK. Isabel becomes involved in political activism to address the situation she encounters. In addition, she travels all over her country, but the journey is symbolic of her own journey to find her identity and decide her future. So, Margaret, I want to welcome you to the Books on Air podcast.
Thank you. Good summary. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so let's start out by telling the audience just a little bit about yourself and what led you to write your book, The Dogs Are Curling Up Again.
I spent 2 years in Chile, and in the late 1990s when the book is set, but I've spent extended periods of time since then and traveled a great deal around Chile. And I felt that I'd learned so much, and there was so much to say about the military coup and the after effects and the effects of people who were in exile in this country and all over the world, and the losses they had suffered. Mm-hmm. Isabel, in the main protagonist, lost her father to the military regime. He was one that disappeared, and in fact her teenage boyfriend. Less serious relationship, but nevertheless a big loss. And then when she goes into exile, she loses her mother. She goes with her stepmother, and she loses her friends. She loses her culture and her country, her continent even. Yeah. And it's a big step. And she always felt an outsider, I think, as many Chileans do, and refugees in general do in this country. And then when she goes back to Chile, she finds a country very different, very changed, divided, in fact. And that's not easy to deal with. Almost she was as extreme there as in England. Yeah. And yes, and she she embarks, as you said, on the activism and feeling it's the only way really to search for the country she remembers, the country underneath the whitewashed crimes of the dictatorship that had been sort of washed over. And the stranglehold that the military still has on the society, and the constitution that the dictator imposed, which was so unjust to many sections of the community.
Yeah, and so it sounds like a lot of change, a lot of loss, a lot of maybe personal discovery along the way for her.
Yes. And yes, I think her journey around Chile is very symbolic of her searching for herself and her identity, and what was she going to do, where would her future be. And then when she meets a Chilean man, a fellow teacher, because she starts teaching in a school to try to get some money to continue her political activities, but she becomes the lover of this Chilean man, and he's very supportive of the work she wants to achieve. But then her English partner that she'd been with 7 years or so before she returned to Chile, he gets message to her somehow that he's searching for her. He's in Chile. He's doing voluntary work in Chile, and he's really there to look for her. So then she's very torn. What should she do? Where should her future be?
Yeah. So, and tell us how you came up with the title, The Dogs Are Curling Up Again. I liked that title. I thought it was very interesting.
Yes. Oh, when I first arrived in Chile, it was winter. And they do have dogs living in the street. The local authorities have tried to get rid of the dogs, thinking they should tidy them up. But many local people are very fond of their dogs. I never saw a dog in a bad condition. The people feed them and take care of them, but they live outside. That, to them, it's the normal place that dogs should be, outside, not in a house.
Yeah.
And in the winter, when it's cold at night, they curl themselves into perfect circles. So the pavement is covered with round circles of dog fur, which is quite fun to see. But also, later in the book, I liken the dogs to the leaders of a country that are not serving their people. And so there's a kind of secondary meaning to the dogs who are indifferent to the feelings and sufferings of the people.
Oh, and I can picture that, dogs on the street just curled up like that.
Yes.
So, okay, so your book, you told us, it's Isabel is the main character. The story takes place between Chile and the UK. And you mentioned she has some lovers that she's considering which way to go. So, are there any other main characters and does it take place throughout the whole country of Chile, or is it certain areas?
It's primarily set in Valparaiso, the port of the capital, Santiago. And then Isabel takes the teaching job in La Serena, which is about an overnight bus ride north of Valparaiso. But her English partner ends up having a flat in Valparaiso, and she goes to visit him there. And of course, in Valparaiso is where the military government, under pressure, I think, from the States, felt obliged to reluctantly create a parliament. And there's a new architecturally extraordinary building in Valparaiso. But to have the parliament away from the capital city, a couple of hours drive away, it gives very much the impression that really the government didn't want any interference from these tiresome politicians who might question what they're doing. They were kind of disbanded to the margins.
Yeah. And so we talked a little bit about Isabel and her activism, and your book examines really our duties as citizens and our responsibilities in the face of injustice. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you came to write about this? Was it based on your experiences in Chile or in your own life? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I guess I've always been interested in politics. I did politics at Edinburgh University. That was my subject.
Yeah.
And I've always been active and taken part in demonstrations. I wouldn't say I've ever got into civil disobedience, but I do wonder how far, and I think the book asks questions about how far you should go. The suffragettes, for example, took to violence against property. I would never say any violence against people should be perpetrated, but is it right if no one's listening to you for decades that you start damaging property? And that's debated in the book. And I think in these days of climate change and the lack of action, really, by our governments on something that it is going to be very seriously affect our lives and possibly become irreversible soon. What responsibilities do we have, and how far should we go?
I think it's an interesting question, especially because often it's very easy to look at the other side, whatever the other side is that you maybe don't agree, that a person doesn't agree with. And it's easy to project hate on that other side, right? To anger, all these negative feelings on that other side. And it's interesting to think about, because it often, without even really realizing it, I think it's easy to become that thing that you dislike in the person, right? It's easy to become then a person filled with hate or anger or rage. And I think that what you're talking about, what's the line? Like, what's the line of involvement? What's the line of making a difference? But then what's also your own personal line, so you don't become that thing that you hate, And
yes,
it's very interesting to think about that, I think, as internally in our own lives.
Yes, I think we do have to question ourselves. I felt it maybe was a bit presumptuous of me to try and think I could step into the shoes of a Chilean and really express her experience, and yet I felt I needed to write about a female primarily. And I felt that I had something to say, not only from all I'd learned about the society and what I believe a person like that has been through, but something to say about my own society as well. I could see when I was in Chile in the late 90s, the harshness of life without a welfare state, the adequate welfare state. There was a little, or adequate health services, and at the same time, I knew that in my own society, the welfare state was in the process of being destroyed or removed step by step, and there's been this deterioration, I think, in community and sense of solidarity that's come about ever since Reagan and Thatcher were bringing in a neoliberalism, which is not very different from what the military imposed in Chile. In Chile, it was a sudden military coup, an awful shock, and thousands died. But in North America and other Western societies, and particularly in Britain, I feel that there has been this creeping effect that ends up very similar to what's happened in Chile. Greater poverty, greater inequality. The inequality really bothers me. It's so extreme now, and the lack of adequate, affordable housing, and the lack of adequate funds going into health and education, and these erode any sense of community, and in fact, I think cause a great deal of resentment, perhaps even violence, but or bad societal effects that come out of that huge divide between those who have and those who have not.
Yeah, the chain reaction of, and like you were saying, it sounds like in Chile it was more shock and all at once, whereas other places it's a slow movement, so it's not felt as abruptly maybe as
but ends up in very, very similar situation. I think
one of your other themes in your book is about our interconnectedness to each other and building a better world for all. So can you tell us how you were able to weave this theme in with some of the characters in your book?
Yes, the boyfriend or the partner from England who's doing voluntary work in Chile and looking for Isabel, Julian, his name is. He he goes to visit the house of Pablo Neruda, the considered the greatest poet in the Spanish language of the 20th century, a Nobel Prize-winning Chilean poet. And he wrote a poem about how we are. He reflects on this poem when he's sitting in the garden of Pablo Neruda's house, and the poem talks about how we are all interconnected with one another, and how our economies internationally too are interconnected, and our needs are interconnected as human beings. We have very different cultural expressions, but we have a responsibility towards one another, because we empathize with other people's situations from our humanity, and I think that gives us that responsibility to want to create a better world for all of us. And I think there are characters in the book who are trying to do that. There's Joaquin, who gives up his work as a youth worker, paid job for the local authority, working in one of the poorest areas of Valparaiso, and he is going to instigate and lead a homelessness project. And I was close friends with this guy when I lived there, and I regard him almost as my Chilean son, although we're not related in any way. But he's about the same age as my own sons, and he, as I say, gave up his job to help people build their own homes, physically build them, and have a home that they never ever had in the past, from young people who had no prospect of ever owning their own home, to grandmas who'd never had a house that they could call their own independent home. I mean, admirable person, and there are a lot of poetic and literature and artistic and music references in the books. So it's a real introduction to the culture, but I think a lot of people who are really concerned to build that solidarity that they're very, very keen on talking about in Chile, which is a lovely aspect of the society. In Isabel's travels, she meets people in different parts, working for the same ends. And that's why she got into filming what projects were doing around the country, to share with others, to try to spread the word about how things could be improved, and a political awareness of why things were as they were economically and politically in that country.
You know, I think that the phrase building a better world, it can seem like it's like, what's the point? Or that we'll never, do that. And one of the things that I'd love to remind myself of is, I'm responsible for my corner of the world, right? I'm not responsible for fixing everything in the world, but what can I do in my corner of the world, right? Yes. And it sounds like that's what Isabel in the book is referencing or talking about, or maybe wanting people to know that, we can't fix everything, but if we take a look at what's in our neighborhood, our community, whatever it is for us, and ask ourselves, what can we do about it? That is definitely more doable. And there's more, satisfaction almost in that, because otherwise it feels like, well, it's never enough, or what's the point, right? And that completely loses the perspective of the idea.
Yes, absolutely. As Tolstoy said, going to a completely different culture, if we all take one, there is no problem. Yeah. He was returning to his country home, having seen people in the slums of Moscow, in his time, and he's telling the lodge gate man as he returns home, and he enters his estate about this terrible suffering that he's seen, and his worry about how people pass their time in such poverty. And the lodge gate man doesn't seem at all moved by his story. And he just says, well, if we all take one, there is no problem.
Yeah.
And it's true. If we all did our little bit.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And well, we're coming up on the end of our time, Margaret, and I want to just tell you, it's been so lovely to talk to you and learn about your book, The Dogs Are Curling Up Again. And again, I love that title. Before we close out today, what do you hope readers learn or take away after reading your book?
I think I did mention about Pablo Neruda's poem, that we are all interconnected. I think the other things people can take away is, I think it's very fascinating and enjoyable to explore another culture, the geography, the history, the current affairs. We've talked about the direct action and civil disobedience that I think are legitimate when a government is failing to provide for the needs of its citizens. And I hope people will see it as legitimate. And then I think there's also a satisfaction in the story. I tried to make sure that was the case, that Isabel does resolve her dilemmas, and she does find a much deeper or able to give a deeper commitment when she realizes that the death of her father and her boyfriend were creating a sort of emotional lockdown in her. She made a protective armor around herself that was holding her back from really risking a loss again. She was trying to protect herself instead of giving herself. And when she can learn to do that again, she makes the success of her personal relationships as she hadn't before.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like an amazing book, Margaret. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today. My guest has been Margaret Townley, author of the book, The Dogs Are Curling Up Again. And again, Margaret, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the chance.
You can find more about the book, The Dogs Are Curling Up Again, on Amazon, and I'll link to the book in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join us for the next Books on Air podcast. Remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.